Good afternoon, everybody. It's Tuesday afternoon, it's 2 o'clock, and it's time for Foundations Live. So welcome to our office in Manchester. I think this is the first time I've done Foundations Live from the office. So you can see we've got the right way. Got the sign on the wall behind us. I've got the office to myself today, so I can do it from the office. But if you haven't joined us before, we are the national body for home improvement agencies and the Disabled Facilities Grant in England, and we're funded by the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Governments. We're here to support you with anything DFG and home improvement agency related. If you're looking for closed captions and you're watching on the website, if you scroll down to the bottom of the page, you can find the links to YouTube and LinkedIn where you can find the closed captions. So thank you for joining us this afternoon. So as Trail, today's going to be all about adaptations in council housing. So we've got Elaine from the Local Government Ombudsman who's going to come and give their perspective on adaptations in council housing, and hopefully Kevin from Norwich City Council, although we're having a bit of trouble with his camera, but hopefully that will be up and running by the time Kevin comes to speak. But just a couple of things before we start. So hopefully you've all seen that the allocations for the 26-27 Disabled Facilities Grant have been published. So good news was that the budget has gone up again to 723 million, which was kind of the headline from that announcement, but also that the new allocations formula. So if you're a regular for Foundations Live, we did a special edition with colleagues from MHCLG towards the end of last year, where they went through the details and the consultation on the allocations formula. They've now published their response to that consultation, tweaked the formula a little bit, so certainly in terms of taking more account of children with disabilities in a particular area, and that's now been published as well. So as with changes in any formula, it does mean some will potentially get a bit more, some will potentially get a bit less. But I think kind of the key thing is that nobody's going to get less in 26-27 than they did in 25-26. And there's also protections in place for 27-28 and for 2028-29. So there certainly won't be any changes for the next 3 years, but we'll be doing more. I'm sure we'll do another Foundations Live and some more details on the allocations formula in the coming weeks and months. And just on other things that are coming up, we start off on DFG Champions Roadshows this week. So heading up to Newcastle tomorrow, ready for their first roadshow of the year in Newcastle on Thursday. And we'll also be visiting Bristol, Nottingham, Manchester, and 2 dates in London. All the tickets are pretty much gone. I think there's a couple left for the final date in London, but we do have a waiting list. So if anybody returns their ticket, we try and get as many out as possible. And one of the sessions we'll be focusing on this time around is the DFG Quality Mark, something new that we're releasing this year. And it's a deck of 75 cards, each with a different element of what we think makes up a good DFG service. So you'll get to come along, get one of the cards, and pack of the cards, and we'll go through what we're trying to do with the DFG Quality Mark, which will launch properly later this year. And the other thing that we've introduced last year, which still applies to this year's DFG Champions Roadshows, is that for everybody who attends, we plant a tree. Tree's gone over my name there. But so for everybody who attends, we kind of recognise that there is a bit of a carbon footprint in terms of getting out to events. But for everybody who's kind of booked a ticket and turns up, we plant a tree. So hopefully that eases your conscience about being out and about. So, without too much more ado, I will start talking about um, adaptations in social housing and particularly in council housing. So I just wanted to first go through what is relatively new, but perhaps not as new as it used to be. The requirements from the regulator for social housing, which has been around for a couple of years now. But the idea with the regulator for social housing is that it ensures that all social housing providers, including local authority landlords, deliver safe and decent homes, protects tenant rights and promotes accountability. And it was established after Grenfell, and it enforces standards on housing quality, tenant involvement. The regulator conducts regular inspections and then takes enforcement actions. And it works with the Housing Ombudsman on specific issues. I haven't, in terms of their regular inspections and reports, I haven't seen very many that have featured adaptations yet. But there are a number of the elements of the consumer standards that the regulator introduced that do involve home adaptations. But just to set it in a little bit further, let's say that there is the consumer regulator and there is the social housing ombudsman. So the regulator is there to set out standards, and they carry out inspections of housing landlords, including local authorities, whereas the social housing ombudsman investigates individual complaints from tenants about social housing issues. And then Elaine, who's from the local government ombudsman, who will also be speaking a little bit later, looks at issues around, I suppose, kind of local government complaints, where it's more around DFG eligibility, which obviously does apply to local authorities' retained stock as well as any other tenure. So I just wanted to run through some of the standards so you're kind of aware of what landlords, and particularly council landlords, need to do as part of the consumer standards. So 2.3.2 is that they must provide tenants with accessible information about tenants' rights in respect of registered providers' legal obligations and the regulatory requirements, and includes information on the right of disabled tenants to reasonable adjustments. So that's a key element of one of the consumer standards. And in the tenancy standard, it says that landlords must seek to allocate homes that are designated, designed, or adapted to meet specific needs in a way that is compatible with the purpose of the housing. So basically, if a home has already been adapted or made accessible in some way, then they should seek to allocate that home to somebody who needs it. The quality or safety and quality standard, again, has a particular section on adaptations, saying that landlords must assist tenants seeking housing adaptations to access appropriate services. And also in the safety and quality standard, it says that landlords must use data from across their records on stock condition as part of allocating homes that are designed or adapted to meet specific needs. So basically, landlords should keep a record of where adaptations have been carried out and what the accessibility of their dwellings are. Also part of the safety and quality standard is a section on adaptations. So registered providers or landlords must clearly communicate to tenants how they will assist them in seeking housing adaptation services, and they must cooperate with tenants and other local authority departments when a tenant needs adaptations. These are all very clearly set out in the consumer standards. But as I say, I haven't seen many of the regulators inspection reports where these have been particularly checked or referenced to date. So what about council housing in particular? So we did we did a survey a couple of years ago now, but I think it's kind of important to point out, and something that quite often gets mistaken or confused is that council tenants are sometimes thought not to be eligible for DFGs, which is definitely not the case. So the DFG legislation covers all tenures, including social tenants in both housing associations and in local authority properties, as well as it covers private rent and owner-occupiers. But it's the funding that are kind of the allocations that I mentioned a little bit earlier that isn't there to fund adaptations in council stock. So funding from government, so the 723 million I mentioned earlier for next year, is for owner-occupiers, private tenants, and housing association tenants. The funding for council tenants is part of the housing revenue account and comes from a separate source. So the legislation covers all tenures, but the funding doesn't, is the difference. And MHCLG back in 2024 provided this guidance that local authority tenants are entitled to the same service consideration as owner-occupiers, private tenants, and tenants of housing associations who, were eligible, would receive funding through the DFG. The self-financing assessment for local authority housing, which has been in place since 2012, includes an allowance for the costs of funding adaptations for the local authority's own tenants and properties. And using disabled facilities grant allocations to fund adaptations to local authorities' own properties held within their housing revenue account therefore constitute a double subsidy and wouldn't be in accordance with the grant conditions. So I think they've been really clear on that. But we did ask some, as I say, we did a survey back in 2024, and we asked local authorities that still retain their own stock how they do deal with DFGs. And as you can see, less than half have a kind of tenure neutral approach in terms of the process and follow the same process as they do for DFGs in other sectors. Just about the majority have an alternative approach. So, and in quite a lot of local authorities, that means that tenants don't apply in the same way as other tenures do, and that there's more kind of a request system, and local authorities just then carry out the work, which links in with some of the other things that we asked about, like, are council tenants means tested? And as you can see in kind of the vast majority of local authorities, council tenants aren't routinely means tested. In fact, there was only a small proportion of local authorities that do means test their tenants, which I think, even if they follow the same process for DFG, very few are actually still means testing tenants as part of that. Are council tenants referred by an OT? So that's relatively similar, I think, to the vast majority of other DFGs, in that the vast majority of tenants referred are referred in by an OT or through social services or social care. And the vast majority are managed by an in-house team. So there's only a few local authorities where they may have an external home improvement agency or other service that actually does manage the service externally to the council. And this one was, I think, quite different in terms of average costs. So for comparative sake, we've used the average cost bandings from the Delta returns that all local authorities submit every year for their kind of other DFGs. As you can see, for the DFGs, the majority now fall within the £5,000 to £15,000 band, and there's less than like about 42% are under 5,000. But in local authority stock, over 75% fall under that £5,000 mark. And interestingly, there's quite a lot more £30,000 or more. That's around kind of 15% of cases, £30,000 or more in council housing, compared with about 4 or 5% back in 2024. It's gone up a little bit since for other tenures, but in council housing, it's either quite a low cost adaptation under 5,000, or it's a big adaptation over 30,000. There are very few that cost between 5 and 30,000. So a very different profile, I think, in terms of the type of works and the type of funds that are awarded if you're a council tenant. Also looked at the age profile of disabled occupants compared to DFGs more generally. So you can see that the kind of the percentage of under 18s or children's adaptations are relatively similar. It's a little bit under 10%, but in council housing, it's much more likely to be for somebody of working age, and less likely to be an older person than it is in other DFGs. And in terms of average times, I mean, this may be related to the scale of the works that we looked at a little earlier, but for stages two, for stage 2 of the process, it's a few weeks quicker in council housing than it is for other DFGs. The approval process, stage 3, is a little bit longer, but then the kind of contractual delivery phase for both council housing and other DFGs is roughly around the same. And then I think that this one is just kind of taking a kind of step back and seeing where DFG applications come from across all tenures. So the grey bars on that particular chart give a representation of where all the compositions of the housing stock in England. So you can see just over 60% of all homes in England are owner occupied, and the smallest tenure by number of properties is council housing. It's kind of smaller than housing association and much smaller than private rent. But actually, in terms of the number of adaptations done for in council housing, it's more than any other tenure. So it's the smallest housing stock and the most adaptations. So actually, if you're a council tenant, you're far more likely to get an adaptation based on these figures than anybody else living in any other tenure, which I thought was a really interesting fact. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to welcome Elaine Kerr from the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman. Elaine joined us at the High Cost Adaptation Summit that we did last year. I think it was last year, and spoke about some of the high cost cases that the Ombudsman have investigated across all tenures. I think one in particular was a housing association case, wasn't it? But Elaine's come back today because, as I said, they also investigate some issues around DFGs and council properties. So I'm going to hand over to Elaine to run through some of their findings from disabled adaptations in council housing.
Brilliant. Thank you, Paul, and good morning, everyone. Afternoon, even. Good morning. Hopefully you can all hear me okay. Like Paul said, my name is Elaine. I am an assessment manager at LGSCO, the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman. So who are we? We investigate complaints about all councils in England, as well as providers of adult social care and some other public bodies, national parks and some fire and rescue authorities and things also fall within our jurisdiction. And our role is to remedy personal injustice where we find evidence of fault. So fault is our kind of plain English term for what the law calls maladministration, basically where things have gone wrong and that has caused an injustice, then we can remedy that injustice by making recommendations to put things right. For those of you who have a kind of council housing background, you might be more familiar with the Housing Ombudsman, which makes orders. We don't. Our recommendations are not binding, but we nonetheless achieve over 99% compliance. And we, as well as remedying injustice for the individual, attempt to improve public services more generally. And we do that by recommending service improvements, issuing good practice guides, and sharing the learning from our investigations as widely as we can. So by doing things like coming along to events like these, we also publish almost all of our decisions online. And we do carry out some joint investigations with the Housing Ombudsman where our jurisdictions intertwine so much that we could not meaningfully investigate a complaint effectively if we didn't. And some DFG complaints do end up as those joint investigations. So some key points that I suppose want to make sure that you all take away today based on the casework that we've seen and some of the conversations that we've had with councils as part of those investigations. As Paul has explained, tenants of social landlords, including councils, can apply for DFGs. This does come as a surprise to more councils than perhaps I had first realised when I started in on this work. And this is important because under the law that sets out DFGs, which is, it's got a very unwieldy title. It's called the Housing Grants Construction and Regeneration Act of 1996. Horrible title. The DFG legislation. There are a defined list of purposes that DFGs can be used for, and councils must pay for those works up to £30,000 if the works are necessary to meet one of those purposes, and they are necessary, appropriate, reasonable, and practicable. That's the test in law. Whether works are necessary and appropriate will usually require an assessment by an OT or from social care, but it is the local housing authority, that's probably most of you, that makes the decision. Reasonable and practicable, part of the test, has been interpreted by the courts very narrowly as being limited to the age and condition of the property. And it's unlikely that the cost of the works would be grounds to refuse a DFG. So I say this all because we know that for council tenants in particular, the policy often goes much further, right? So the mandatory grants, DFGs are mandatory grants. Councils, you may have a separate policy that is much more restrictive. And so that's why I'm setting out the distinction and why it's so important that you know that tenants can apply for a DFG. But as Paul explained, as a landlord, you don't get to pay for them from the Better Care Fund like everyone else. You have to use the housing revenue account. But our view here at the Ombudsman is that that should not affect applicants, right? That's an internal accounting measure. Our approach to adaptations for disabled tenants is therefore that you should either use the same process to assess all applications for disabled adaptations, regardless of their tenure, or have a separate scheme that does not treat council tenants less favourably, or tell your tenants that they can apply for a DFG if they are refused under your separate scheme. This is because DFGs are mandatory, right? Like I said, councils have to pay them where the tests are met. And what that means is that here at the Ombudsman, if we receive a complaint, we will be critical of councils which don't tell their tenants that they can apply for a DFG, or which maintain a separate policy for adapting your own properties that treats tenants less favourably than applicants from other tenures, or that doesn't consider those 4 statutory tests: necessary, appropriate, reasonable, and practicable. However, as Paul also highlighted, DFGs are means tested, and most councils do not apply a means test for adapting their stock. And that means that some tenants can be better off because you as a council have a separate scheme, right? That you do a more, you might have a more restrictive criteria, but a more generous award or grant or extent of the works that result, and that you don't require your tenant to pay for them. And we are not going to sit here and tell you that's wrong, right? Because we don't want people to lose out. However, if you are refusing adaptations under that scheme, you still should be telling your tenant they can apply for a DFG, and that may be means tested. Okay, so if you operate the same scheme for everybody, but you just don't means test for your tenants, fine, you're still applying the same criteria. If you apply different criteria that go beyond or are more restrictive, such as we won't do a DFG if you're under occupying, or we won't do a DFG if we think you can move, which are not relevant considerations when it comes to DFGs. The necessary, appropriate, reasonable, and practicable tests don't care if your house has 1 extra bedroom. But if you're following the same process and you just don't means test for your tenants, fine. If you follow a different process and don't means test for your tenants, you then need to tell them that they have a right to apply for a DFG. The court has made it really clear that there's a piece of legislation, Paul, correct me if I misremember, a piece of case law, Islington v. McEwen from 2020, in which the court made it really clear that you can't refuse a DFG because the property as a whole is unsuitable, and you cannot require a tenant to move instead of providing adaptations. You can offer the tenant the opportunity to move, right, to an already adapted property or a more suitable home, but you can't make them move or decline a DFG because they don't want to. So overall, key principle, your tenants should not be treated less favourably because they are council tenants than if they lived in any other kind of tenure. So what does this look like in practice? Right? If you have a separate policy for adapting your own stock, make sure you know what it is and check that it's up to date. We've dealt with a few complaints recently where councils realised their adaptations policies come from, haven't been updated since 2008 or 2011 and are, years and years and years out of date. So make sure that you're reviewing your policies regularly. If you follow the DFG process, try to keep your role as a landlord as separate as you can from your role as the decision maker for DFGs. Ideally, that means that whoever is deciding whether to consent to the works should be a different person or team from that proposing or planning them. Also means you shouldn't take into account things like the value of the property or the applicability of the works to the needs of potential future tenants when you're deciding whether to make adaptations or which adaptations to make. We investigated a complaint last year where we found fault with the council for, among other things, conflating its landlord role with its DFG decision making and considering such factors when deciding on works. This meant that the works became more generic and less suited to the current tenant's needs because the council was thinking about improving its accessible housing stock more generally. Getting social care involved early saves you time and money, right? Paul highlighted how many of the adaptations that councils are doing to their own stock cost £5,000 or less. I'm willing to stake something, probably not my house, but certainly maybe a few key possessions, that lots of those things are grab rails, right? Ramps, maybe level access showers, especially if you've got in-house contractors who can do it for less than $5,000. Don't guess what is going to meet the tenant's needs without an assessment by someone whose job it is to know that, only to have to rip it out and do it again because the OT then comes out and does an assessment and says, no, that's completely completely unsuitable, which is another thing that we have seen happen in cases we've investigated. Also, social care might be able to contribute to the cost of the works from other budgets, right? Paying towards adaptations that keep a tenant independent is a lot cheaper than a permanent care package, right? Putting in, social care stumping up some money to put in, I don't know, a ceiling track hoist, and help build an extension for a downstairs bedroom and bathroom is expensive, no denying that, but it's a lot cheaper than that same disabled individual, especially for those younger, working age disabled people who may well have care and support needs for a very long time. The more of those that can be removed and the more independence created by those adaptations, the more money as a local authority overall you will save. And having some kind of joint protocol or at least established relationship with social care, especially if you are in a two-tier authority area and you need, you're having to go to the county, certainly while counties continue to exist, establishing some kind of regular communication that enables you to, for want of a better expression, shake them down, get assessments promptly, get the right advice about what your tenants need and how, would all be, will all make ultimately your and your tenants' lives easier, better, cheaper. Explain things properly to your tenants, right? Have information and guidance available. If you follow a separate process to DFGs, explain that and have it be available on your website. Explain what is different for council tenants if it's different. And crucially, and especially if you are refusing under that process, tell them they can apply for a DFG still. If they need an assessment, do you know who arranges that and how? Right? Do you have those links into the OT service? Minimize disruption. Right? If the property also needs repairs or is due for regeneration works, like a new kitchen or bathroom, try and coordinate those works to minimize the disruption for the tenant and save you time and money on contractors, scaffolding. And believe it or not, we have seen complaints where, for example, the council replaced a bathroom as part of its usual cycle of property updates, only to rip the whole thing out 6 months later to put in a level access shower once the DFG was approved. Right? Total waste of public money. That's a particularly egregious example, but the underlying principle stands. Work with your repairs and your kind of regeneration, or I don't even know if it's still called tenant's choice. It was back when I worked in a council. Coordinate those works, but do not delay putting in adaptations because of some potential works that might occur in the future. Understand the implications of your allocations policy. If you're recommending rehousing as an alternative, how realistic is that? What is the tenant's likely priority? How long are they likely to wait? Is it therefore a genuinely realistic option? And what does your allocations policy say about priority for moves when adaptations are possible or planned or have been applied for? What does your policy say about doing works if the person is also seeking rehousing? Many policies do not allow you to join the housing register if you do not allow you to apply for adaptations if you are also actively seeking rehousing. And in part, that's because as part of the DFG, if you're following that, there's an expectation that you intend to continue to occupy that home for at least 5 years. And if you're actively seeking rehousing, that's unlikely to be true. Knowing these things, or knowing where to find out, will make sure that you can support your tenants to make informed decisions about rehousing. I personally previously investigated a complaint where the council declined to adapt the property because the family agreed to pursue rehousing. But the size of the family and the specificity of their needs meant that years later, they were still waiting in a wildly unsuitable home. If the officers in tenancy management had properly understood the timescales involved in pursuing rehousing and advised the family accordingly, they would have pursued adaptations instead. The father, it was a fairly large family, I think there were 4 children, so they needed a reasonably large property with at least one downstairs bedroom. The father was the disabled person, and for all of this time, he was confined to the living room, the only room in the house that he could access. He had to eat, sleep, bathe, and go to the toilet in there. Bathing meant standing on a plastic sheet while his wife washed him down with cloths. Toileting meant a commode for years. There was no room for a bed, so he had to sleep on a recliner. All because adaptations thought rehousing was the option, and rehousing said adaptations is better. That's going to be a more realistic option for you. And the allocations policy of that particular local authority restricted people who needed adaptations to bidding on already adapted properties. So he could not bid on a home that could be adapted to meet his needs because he was already in social housing. And so they were like, well, we would just adapt this one then. And so it was clearly going nowhere. But the poor advice left this man in completely unacceptable circumstances for, if memory serves, 27 months. So it's all gone wrong. You're dealing with a complaint. What happens? If you have a complaint about adaptations from one of your tenants, you may need to coordinate with other parts of the council. In particular, social care, or possibly a home improvement agency or your adaptation service, to ensure that your response properly addresses the complaint. Both we at LGSCO and the Housing Ombudsman have complaint handling codes, which are broadly in line with each other, you'll be pleased to know, and which set out expectations and good practice for complaint handling. And part of that is that you should respond to as much or preferably all of the complaint in a single response. Right? It's not good enough for you as housing management to respond to only the parts that refer to housing management and say that's a complaint about allocations, so we haven't looked at that. Right? You as a council are a single corporate body and you should respond to complaints as a single corporate body. We also have a memorandum of understanding with the Housing Ombudsman, and as part of that, we agree that any complaints about disabled adaptations, which are for one or more of the purposes set out in that really lengthily named piece of legislation that I mentioned earlier. Section 23 is the part that sets out the various purposes for which someone can have a DFG. If the complaint is about adaptations that would meet one of those purposes, then that complaint will be for us here at LGSCO in the first instance. And then if needed in a particular case, we will pursue joint investigation with the Housing Ombudsman. However, the Housing Ombudsman would be the right ombudsman if the complaint was, for example, only about whether you as a landlord had granted permission for DFG works. Right? Because part of the DFG process involves getting landlord consent. So if you have a process where people apply for DFGs like normal, regardless of their tenure, you as a landlord will be required to consent to those works. So if a complaint was just the council as my landlord refused to grant permission for DFG works, then that would be a complaint for the Housing Ombudsman. Basically, any other complaint about disabled adaptations, you should signpost to us at LGSCO in the first instance. And there is a page on our website called Which Ombudsman for Complaints About Social Housing. So on our website, and it's on the Housing Ombudsman's website. It is shortly to be updated following some changes to our jurisdiction in the Renters' Rights Act, but none that affect DFGs. But it will have some handy dandy flowcharts that make it even easier to figure out which ombudsman to signpost to. But as it stands, it's there. It's a detailed table that goes down all the different possible, or not every, obviously we can't cover every scenario, but most of the common kinds of complaints, and help you figure out which ombudsman to signpost to. And if it's a complaint about disabled adaptations, regardless of tenure, regardless of your policy, chances are you should be signposting to us at LGSCO. And a lot of our work in this area in recent years has been encouraging, supporting, recommending that councils review and update their policies and processes for their own tenants. We had several complaints from councils who, not from councils, against councils, who, I remember one, I don't remember which local authority it was a fairly small district council, who didn't even realise that within their own council there was a housing adaptations team. Right? They dealt with everything so separately in housing management, they didn't even know they had an adaptation service. You know, pursuing the same ends in the same community entirely separately. No shared learning, no and no kind of shared policies, no shared processes, no signposting of tenants that they could have DFGs if they didn't meet the criteria under this other scheme. And a lot of our complaints in this area recently have involved recommendations for councils to improve, renew, revisit their policies. So one of my big takeaways for you here today is update your policies and processes. Ask officers in housing management to liaise with your adaptation service if you have one and they don't already. And make sure you know which ombudsman to signpost complaints to at the end of the process. You might need to provide some training or guidance. If you want to know more, we recently, late last year, published a good practice guide on housing for disabled people, which included good practice on DFGs. We also deliver effective complaint handling training, and we publish almost all of our decisions. You can sign up for weekly newsletters to get our decisions. And Paul, I don't know whether it's possible to take questions or if there's a facility for questions at the end. I know it's a really big webinar, but if we can't take questions and you do want to get in touch, there is information for our external training and relationship manager, which I will pop into the chat if you have specific questions.
Yeah, we've got a few questions. Thank you for that, Elaine. And I must admit, I did the complaints training, and this was probably about, I don't know what it had been 20 years ago, but it was definitely one of the best training courses I'd ever done. It was quite kind of practical in terms of kind of working through a complaint and kind of understanding the way.
Try and make it useful.
Yes. So yeah, it was definitely one of the best training courses I ever did. So if anybody is interested in that, I'd definitely recommend it. But we have had a few questions through. Some might be for you, some might be for me, but we'll kind of run through them. Mm-hmm. I think kind of one of the main things is that differentiation, isn't it, between the landlord service and the kind of the DFG decisions and kind of making decisions in the right way, because sometimes you can, I think, come to a decision, but if you haven't made it in the right way, you can be as unstuck as if you made the right decision. But can you just talk us a little bit around the difference between kind of landlord's permission as a local authority and kind of the right to a DFG, and how the two kind of interact or interrelate? And I guess this is probably right on that cusp of where it's either yourselves or the social housing ombudsman that get involved.
So the McEwan v Islington case is really the kind of leading piece of case law that speaks to this question, I think. And it very clearly said, doesn't matter how unsuitable the rest of the property is, you're not considering the wider suitability, you are considering the applied for works, right? So in that particular case, I think she was a wheelchair user, very strong ties to her local community, wildly unsuitable home. And one of the things that she needed was a step lift to get in and out of the property. And the council, Islington Council, refused permission, or refused to grant the DFG to install the step lift on the grounds that the whole property was unsuitable for her. She didn't have proper access to a bathroom. She couldn't reliably get to her own bedroom. She couldn't use the stairs. There was lots and lots of issues in the property. But what the court found was, but she applied for a step lift and she does need one of those. It is necessary and appropriate to meet a need, access and egress from her home. And it is reasonable and practicable. It's possible to put one in. And that on that basis, the council should have granted a mandatory DFG. There were no grounds to refuse. And what I think that means, and I'm not a lawyer, or a kind of social housing from that side of it expert, but what I would understand that to mean is this is a specific duty towards an individual tenant. Your wider best use of stock is a more general duty, and generally specific duties trump general duties. So, and they're not in tension, right? It's, but you can't make tenants move. They're tenants of that property. You can't force them to move their home. You can encourage them, you can incentivize. If you could force people to move, you wouldn't need to have downsizing incentivization schemes, and the same applies for disabled adaptations.
Yeah, I think the slightly difficult bit about that case was that Islington, I don't think, realised that there was a difference between DFG eligibility and their kind of role as a landlord, did they? And
No.
If they had have put that forward, I think it would have been a much more useful bit of case law. But
potentially, yes.
So yes, that's kind of where we've landed with that one, isn't it? There's another one from Rebecca in terms of refusing to offer the property based on the needs for adaptation, which again is probably more the social housing ombudsman, isn't it, in terms of...
Actually, no, this is allocations. So if someone's awaiting housing and a property that needs adaptation, can the council refuse to offer the property based on the need for adaptation? That depends on what your allocations policy says. So you have to allocate in line with your allocations policy. So if your allocations policy says we only offer already adapted stock to people who need adaptations, then yes. However, with the big caveat that the courts have been quite willing in recent years to find adaptations policies to be discriminatory on the grounds of disability in particular, because of policies like that. Because there's a bunch of research that shows that if you are disabled, you wait way longer for social housing than people who need otherwise the same kind of size and type of property as you. You are much more likely to be waiting. I think Habentech did some research that said it was like 47 years for a new build disabled, like fully adapted property was the wait, and that's for a new build. But there are councils where there are complaints that we get where councils have told us we do not have anything in our stock that is currently or could ever be adapted to meet this need, and that gets at a kind of a wider problem about the ability to build houses and building houses with kind of a level of adaptation already built in and things. But in general, it depends on what your allocations policy says. If your allocations policy says that yes, you can, then you can. If your allocations policy is silent on it, then the answer is probably no, you cannot refuse on the grounds that you would need to adapt the property. Because as Paul mentioned, one of your under the consumer standards side of things is to allocate suitably adapted or properties that can be adapted for the needs of disabled people.
Yeah. There's another one here from Sandra, and this one links to another bit of case law, which was, and I think there have only ever been 4 judicial reviews around DFGs. and I think we've hit on most of them this afternoon. But so this one goes back to the 90s, actually, in a case in Birmingham, where Birmingham did say we're refusing a grant because we've run out of money, and the court got back and said it's a mandatory grant. That's not a fair reason to refuse a grant. So Sandra, in terms of case law, that one's pretty straight cut. If lack of finances isn't a valid reason to refuse a grant.
Lack of finances isn't a valid reason to do almost anything that councils do, unfortunately. I mean, or fortunately, if you are the individual.
This one from Joanna, I think, is almost the McHugh and Islington case in reverse, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
And kind of the rule is that you just look at one purpose and you can't consider the other purposes. So if somebody applies for a level access shower or a stair lift, you can't take into account the external steps because it's a different purpose.
Exactly, and that's what the courts have been very clear on.
What else we should pick one other one here from Francisca.
Good question.
What's your view on kind of the different funding streams? I suppose it's again kind of going back to the different overlapping duties on local authorities. Yes.
So yeah, because councils have social care authorities have a duty under the Care Act. They have a very broad duty to promote, support, enable the well-being and independence of disabled people, or people with care and support needs. But I think this also pulls in Foundation's high cost adaptations protocol, which encourages, just doing a bit of plug in there for you, Paul.
Thank you.
I'm a big fan of the high cost adaptations protocol. It encourages, it kind of asks you to set up these relationships ahead of the need for them to be in place, right? So it's you have those arrangements with social care. It's about understanding a kind of shared purpose. And it usually requires buy-in from people at a senior enough level to care about it and to think about it pragmatically enough. But also you can just say to social care, hey, look, is there funding for this? Chances are they've got money in some budget somewhere. They might say no, but at least you asked.
Absolutely. Let me just I'll put a link to the high cost. I can find it. Right, I'll put the link into the chat so that people can find that. And then I think the last one, and then we'll have to bring Kevin in, who's been waiting very patiently, was the four judicial reviews and case law. If you go to the Foundation's website, which is probably where you're watching us from now, in the library section there are details of all four judicial reviews. One of them had an appeal, so there are two elements to the one, and there is a sixth case or a fifth case where it was around social care finance, which was linked to adaptations. But there's kind of six there that you can have a look at. It's basically four bits of case law. So thank you for that, Elaine. I think we'll probably have a few more questions come through. So if you're kind of okay to hang around after Kevin,
absolutely.
We may come back if we've got some time left. But thank you for now.
No worries. Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And welcome, Kevin. And I've been waiting patiently in the background, getting your camera to work, ready to present. So without further ado, Kevin, I'll add your slides and over to you to tell us about how it works in Norwich.
Brilliant, thanks, Paul. Yeah, I've had some tech issues, so I'm on my phone today, but Paul's going to drive the slides for me. So yeah, I'm here to talk about council stock adaptations in Norwich City Council and the journey that we've been on over actually the last 7 years now, which is quite scary. If you could go to the next slide, please. So a bit about Norwich, just to set the scene really. It's a really small district council. It's in a two-tier authority. We work closely with the county council, but we're a district council, we're a city council. We've got quite a young population. Our average age is far younger than the national average, and it's far younger than our neighbouring authority. But there's about 65 or 66,000 properties in Norwich, but we are a really big landlord in our own right. So in terms of the local scene, so we've still got a stock of about 25%, which is about 15,000 properties. If we go to the next slide, please, Paul. Like a lot of cities, we've got some real challenges. So although we're a young population, we've got quite significant levels of pensioner poverty. It's really quite high. Child poverty is above the national average and the Norfolk-wide average, our county average as well. And most shockingly, we've got a life expectancy difference of close to 10 years for men. And that's actually about a mile as the crow flies, between our most affluent ward and our least affluent ward or most deprived ward. So we've got some real pockets of deprivation, and it can be quite challenging from a health and well-being perspective for our authority to deal with, but we try our best. Next slide, please, Paul. So 6 years ago, much like what's been discussed earlier, we had a tale of two services, really. We had a DFG offer, which was a comprehensive home improvement agency. It was a caseworker-led approach, fully integrated with social services OTs being based directly within the home improvement agency, a wide-ranging RRO policy, zero waiting list, and what was considered to be quite good practice nationally. Council tenants were getting a real poor offer. They had a non-integrated service ran by a generic property services team that offered major and minor adaptations, and that was about it. So if we go to the next slide, I was restructured into the Housing Directorate in September 2019, and our portfolio holder for housing at that time gave me a real clear mandate, the clearest mandate I've ever had from a member, and that was, can you create me a tenure neutral service? They knew already that the offer for council tenants wasn't as comprehensive or as well developed as it was for owner occupiers and people in other social rented properties and private renters as well, and they wanted that service duplicated for council tenants. So the first thing I had to do, next slide, is a lot of fact finding. It was quite tricky. At that point, Property Services was run by an external joint venture, a private company, very much like an Almo setup. Data on adaptations was really limited. It was very difficult to actually get any information out on what was being done for tenants in regards to adaptations. The budget at that time was set at £750,000 per annum, but actually when I started looking into it, there was a forecast outturn of that year of approximately 100k, which equated to about 20 adaptations were going to be delivered. The timescales for adaptations at that time were well over twice as long as what a DFG applicant could get. And the customer journey was really complicated. There was loads and loads of handovers between different services. It's about five or six handovers, depending on the pathway, but it would bounce between the adult social care, the council, the city council, the joint venture, the Almo, the contractor, and it would bounce back and forth between those services as much as 5 to 6 times. Whereas if you were an owner-occupier at that time, depending on your entry route into the service, there would be a handover of either 1 or 0 handovers. So it's a real challenging and different service between the two services. We'll go to the next slide, please. So when we looked at staffing, the staffing it was quite disproportionate as well. So at that time, there was 1.4 FTE staff, full-time equivalent staff working on adaptations. That was half an administrator, half a surveyor, and 0.4 of a resident liaison officer. For 15,000 properties, not a lot of resource being spent on adaptations. This compared to 8.5 full-time equivalents in the Home Improvement Agency. Yet, the demand was about 20% higher for council tenants than private sector equivalents. There was a real big backlog of adaptations, well over 100 at the time, compared to 0 in the private sector. And really significantly, tenants were, as been sort of touched upon already, tenants were far, far more likely to have an adaptation refused. But when I looked at, so there was a lot of bad decisions being made in the context of best use of stock. So people under occupying would typically be refused an adaptation, wanting to get a family home back into family use. Understandable. But when we analysed that and went through in detail, looking at the cases where refusals had happened, it didn't lead to properties going back into general use. So what would happen sometimes as much as 6 or 7 years later, people were being refused adaptations. The council, as a housing authority or a landlord, weren't getting those properties back for families' use, and the tenant was living in that property, struggling with daily living. It was unacceptable, really, in my humble opinion. If we go to the next slide. So what we started doing about it, well, almost immediately we duplicated the integrated Home Improvement Agency approach across all tenures. We recruited an additional caseworker team leader, 3 caseworkers for tenants, 1 full-time technical team leader, 1 OT, and 1 trusted assessor as well. And I've missed one there. There was another technical officer recruited as well. I should have said. I've messed up my slides there. If I go to the next slide. So we grew the team straight away. Within this year, we've increased the budget to 2.75 million per year. We increased the budget year on year greatly. I think in year 1 we went up to 1.5, then we went up to 2, and gradually as we've gone on, we're now at 2.75 million, which is just about right for us at this moment in time. We renegotiated our contract arrangements, and we removed the rate list instantly for all installs. So because we were a home improvement agency, my service already that was well established, we were able to draw upon our existing network or framework of local SME builders and get them delivering our adaptations, because the council's main contractor wasn't able to deliver at the pace and volume that we needed to do, and we renegotiated those contractual arrangements. And we did a full policy update. We increased the offer to all residents through an updated financial assistance policy. Controversially, you may view it, HRA tenants do have to apply in my authority at this moment in time for a DFG, so they are means tested. We have quite a generous offer, so all tenants get at least £6,500 towards their contribution, irrespective of income, but we do means test tenants for a DFG. At the same time, we rolled out a sanctuary scheme service, which has proved to be really quite successful as well, which is adapting properties for victims of domestic abuse to make them be able to stay at home, and otherwise they may present as homeless. So we did that all as one big change in our approach for council tenants that wasn't available to them beforehand. If we go to the next slide, please, Paul. So as of today, we've got a really healthy budget for adaptations. For such a small authority, we're fortunate enough to have a combined budget, and we truly work tenure neutrally. Although the budgets are ring-fenced for HRA and or Housing Revenue Account, council tenancies, general fund, DFG, we work complete tenure, and we have a combined budget of £4.9 million. We're a busy service. We're helping a lot of families. We field over 35 inquiries a week. We get somewhere near the 1,800 inquiries into our service a year. 19 of those a week need an assessment, which would, on average, it works out as 7 complex assessments and 12 non-complex assessments, 7 complex being OT assessments, 12 non-complex being your trusted assessor assessments. We've got capacity of up to 18 assessments a week, 6 complex and 12 non-complex. Demand still outstrips supply at the moment, unfortunately, and we've got an ongoing business case to actually grow our service even more, because the demand post-COVID has skyrocketed and hasn't gone back to levels that were normal before COVID. So we're going to have to grow our service. We've grown our budget, but we need to grow our service now to match demand. And we're quite fortunate that we've got quite committed member commitment behind us to resource us appropriately. We're a busy service in terms of adaptations. We've got about 20 works on site at any given point. So there's a lot of throughput. There's about 10 building new jobs starting on site at any week in Norwich. So it's quite a busy service. Next slide. So I've flown through this, but I hope it's been of use. The results have been quite drastic for us. We've got real high levels of throughput for our service. DFGs are provided on target. We're on target this year to deliver about 650 grants to people or forms of assistance. 400 of those will be traditional DFGs. The other 250 are other forms of assistance that we offer, one of them which is our sanctuary scheme. We've got the ability to be really agile with demands, because we've got this complete service that's got occupational therapy, caseworkers, surveyors, our own contractors, and the like. We've got the ability to be really agile to urgent demands, especially with palliative cases. So we can turn around a case for a major adaptation in under 30 days when necessary. And that includes that OT assessment as well. So that's the complete journey. And all our timescales, we always talk about the first point of picking up the phone right through to completing the works. It's not the stage, if you know the guidance, it's not stages 2, 3, and 4. We always consider the client journey from when they say, I need help, to getting that help, including the occupational therapy assessment. So last year, we supported over 600, close to 700 people to remain living independently in their own home. We prevented 397 people from being admitted to a long-term care setting. We prevented 62 formal care packages being instigated, and we improved the well-being of 395 informal carers, which prevented carer breakdown, which could have potentially led to more formal carer package being instigated as well. So we're still on a journey. There's still room for improvement. We've got challenges, especially post-COVID. We've still not got through the backlog of cases of having a waiting list. We didn't have a waiting list before COVID, but those cases built up, and we've still not got through. We still hold a waiting list at any given point at the moment, much like many services. But the level of throughput, the commitment to increase demand, increase budget to match our demand is been fantastic. And fundamentally, we take a carrot approach now. People are supported to remain living independently in their own home. We don't take a stick approach. So if someone wants to stay living in their own home and they need an adaptation, we will support them to get their adaptation. If they want to move and they're willing to move to more appropriate accommodation, we fully support them through that process too. So that's the journey we've been on in Norwich. It's still a work in progress, but we're quite proud of what we've achieved today, and I'll happily take any questions.
Great, thank you, Kevin. Let me remove these slides from the stage, and I'll bring Elaine back as well, because we've got a few questions in the few minutes we've got left, and so some of them are a little bit more general, some of them are a little bit more specific. So let's start with this one from Katie. Got a client at the moment. DFG has been maxed. The Housing Association has contributed, and the local authority has used discretionary powers and it's still so high that she's had to see if social care will fund it. I suppose, kind of, Kevin, from your perspective, what would happen in Norwich for that case?
Well, because we're a stock-owning authority, it gives us more options available to us. So if they were in a housing association property that wasn't, it was a registered provider that wasn't one of our own, we wouldn't offer financial assistance beyond the statutory limits. That's our policy choice, because we control the allocation side of things as well. What we would do is move them into a property that we control. We treat high cost adaptations on a case-by-case basis and look at the full picture of what the residents' needs are. So if it's important for them to stay within their area, if they have a community or a network of friends around them or family, and that's important, then that will be considered. We'll look at the property and whether it can be adapted. But fundamentally, if it needs a high cost adaptation and it's within our own stock, we will find the money to do it from our existing budgets. If they're in a housing association property, the more likely route, if the housing association wasn't willing to contribute towards the high cost adaptation, the more likely route would be for them to come into a city council owned property, and then we look to either adapt or find a property on our register that would meet their needs. But as Elaine mentioned earlier, it's quite rare for us to find a property that fully meets their needs. It's normally a case of finding something that has the ability to be adapted, but might need something extra. So whether that's an extension or adaptations within the existing footprint would be treated on a case-by-case basis.
Great. Thanks, Kevin. And I think this was the original one that Katie was referring to. So what would your view be on these, Elaine, in terms of costs over 30,000 and how you would look at kind of a tenant complaining that they need a high cost adaptation and it goes over that 30k?
Short answer is it depends. The long answer is it depends. It's very case by case, and a lot of it will depend on the advice and guidance that the council has provided. Has it properly considered what's in its housing assistance policy beyond the 30k? Councils will usually have some level of discretionary funding available to them. That might be means tested, even if the works under the that come from the HRA budget are not. You might means test, or it might be granted as a loan, or those kinds of options. You can also just expect that the individual meets those costs outside of social housing. For if it was an owner occupier, there are services available specifically to support people to finance these kinds of works. Obviously a bit different in social housing, where your kind of choice, or there's no equity in the home that you're gaining or that can borrow against as a tenant. And that's where I think what Kevin's been describing as that kind of whole person approach really makes sense. That if you're at your 30k cap, but ultimately the costs, to that individual and to, wider community and society at large are, would be significant if we don't meet this person's needs, then it's about that kind of creative process. And I think the high cost adaptations protocol would come in handy here, because you start by thinking about money. I have also seen councils do it in a staged way. So prioritize the works that are most important now that we can get within the DFG budget, and then do another one. It's a bit of a murky area when it comes to DFGs and timing, but you can stagger them if you need to. I've seen, especially for children and young people, where you're making adaptations for someone who is going to need them for their entire lives, then taking that slightly creative approach to meet people's needs also is possible.
Yeah. I think it's difficult to do these on a case-by-case basis. You need to have the system set up, don't you? And that's where the the high cost protocol is I think really helpful. So if you haven't had a look at that already, Molly, I'd recommend having a read through that details on the website.
I'd add, Paul, I regularly award multiple grants for the different purposes for which a grant needs to be given to get the maximum benefit for people. It's murky, I agree, Elaine, but it's a means to an end for me, and I'm fortunate enough that I can do that.
And it's best interests, right? It's the best interests of the individual. So,
Absolutely.
I mean, we would never be critical of you for that at the Ombudsman, I can say.
No, I can't imagine you would. I can't imagine anyone's going to be criticising for me giving more money, so I don't worry about it too much. Don't keep me awake at night.
So I think you've kind of gone over this one already, Elaine. But in terms of housing adaptation policy not being in line with the DFG, I guess probably rewrite it. I guess would be the answer, wouldn't it?
It would be either rewrite it or tell your tenant they can apply for a DFG. It sounds. Can I
add? Mm-hmm. Sorry, Elaine, you carry on.
No, go
on. What I would add to that, Paul, is that what policies really need to be for council tenants, for council stock adaptations. The policy should try and align with the DFG wherever possible, but really what the policy needs to state is your decision making around your function as a landlord and where your decisions are to refuse adaptations, because that's fundamentally what it comes down to. It's when you're making these negative decisions that will negatively impact people's lives, or they perceive it to be negatively affecting them. So where you're saying no, the decision should really be focused on what does your policy say as a landlord that we don't want this property to be adapted for reason X, Y, Z. So you can certainly look at things like being on the register, under occupying, but I'd ask people to exercise a degree of caution around under occupancy for reasons that I gave in my presentation. But really, your policy should be about what tools or parameters do we say no to, or you need to have that covered within your policy when you're talking about we're not going to do this adaptation for people. It's not really about what the adaptation are you going to do, it's because that's set within DFG, so you really want to try and align with that as much as possible. It's about, if we're going to say no, what is our grounds for saying no under this phrase best use of stock, which I really don't like. Hope that's helpful.
And I think Donna was asking if I presume you've got an adaptations policy for council tenants in Norwich. Yeah. So there was this one, I think, potentially for both of you. Where do you stand? Are there high level rent arrears or antisocial behaviour from the tenant?
Again,
do you want to go first on that one?
Yeah, brilliant. So again, Elaine touched upon this earlier, but for us, our approach is around, as a landlord, are we satisfied they're going to foreseeably be there for the next 5 years? So the landlord certificate in the DFG application. So we ask our ASB team and our rent arrears team, foreseeable, in your opinions, from those relevant teams, do you foresee that they will be living there for the next 5 years? So it's been really helpful actually since we've developed our policy, because what we've been able to do is engage with people, support them, and where there is high level sort of rent arrears, we've been able to support people getting onto a rent repayment plan. So it's not about clearing the rent arrears, because sometimes that's unrealistic or it's not going to happen for many, many years. But it's getting the authority to a point where we're satisfied we're not going to seek repossession. Once our rent arrears team is reached that, then we will get on and do the adaptation. So we take an approach very much based around the tenant's, the landlord certificate or the owner certificate on the DFG, and the same approach with ASB. If there's any whiff, for want of a better word, of us seeking repossession for antisocial behaviour, then we will talk to our antisocial behaviour team and see what they've got to say. And if it looks like they won't foreseeably be there, then that will be grounds for not granting the adaptations. But the SB one's pretty rare, to be quite honest, for obvious reasons. But rent arrears has been really helpful. We've formed really close working relationships with our rent arrears team. We've been able to connect and get people engaged on rent repayment plans. So everyone's a winner in those cases.
Yeah, that kind of align with your thoughts, Elaine?
Absolutely. From the landlord perspective, that makes total sense, right? You have that, are they going to live here for the next 5 years? The other side of it is kind of from a kind of social care / kind of decision making under the DFG legislation. The answer is that those are irrelevant considerations, right? They're relevant considerations for you as a landlord in granting permission. They're relevant considerations in the, is it likely that this person will live here for the next 5 years? Once those questions are kind of answered or satisfied, they're not relevant considerations because they don't fall under necessary, appropriate, reasonable, and practicable.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. And I think this will probably be the last one. I know there's a couple more come in, but I think we're running slightly out of time. But Larissa has asked about ceiling track hoist provision, accepted as provision via DFG based on policy, with some safe access to room equates only to door widening. I mean, for looking at that, the purpose isn't really safe access to room. There's a purpose of access to a room, and there's a purpose of making the home safer. So I think, Larissa, you've got your kind of purposes conflated there, and you have to kind of pick one or the other, and or the kind of people who are refusing access got to pick one or the other, and then decide whether it is necessary and appropriate.
I would agree.
Yeah. Cool. Right. Thank you both for joining us today. They keep updating StreamYard, so I've just noticed there's a new button I can press that does. Thank you both for that. I can also do
quite dramatic.
For joining us. It is, isn't it? I like those. I'll take some more. So thank you to Elaine. Thank you for Kevin for joining us today.
Thanks very much.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, so thank you all for joining us today. I hope you found that helpful. We got through as many questions as we can. There's always more questions than we can always get to, but we have got more. We have got more coming up. So over the next, if I can find the right thing to show you, over the next few weeks, we've got a new session on least restrictive practice on the 10th of March. We're going to have a range of CPD sessions on the 24th of March, which will lead into some live CPD events that we're going to have later in the year, and a session on the 21st of April around homes, not houses, where we've got a number of presenters talking about how to make houses suitable for I suppose multi-generations and kind of all sorts of people across all sorts of neighbourhoods, which links very much to some of the things I've written on LinkedIn over recent weeks. So if you've been interested in any of those, then I think the Foundations Live in April will be interesting for you. But thank you again to Elaine and Kevin for joining us today. And thank you to Dan for pressing all the buttons in the background. Just to finish off today, we're on the road with the DFG Champions Roadshows starting in Newcastle on Thursday. Just about got everything ready, so we're looking forward to seeing many of you in Newcastle and around the country over the next few weeks. But if you keep an eye on your inboxes and social media, we're also going to be hosting the first ever Home Adaptations in Social Housing Conference in Manchester on the 1st of July, where we'll have speakers from across England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland talking about some of the challenges of delivering adaptations in social housing and how we can all work together if we're on the same side. So as in well-honoured Foundations tradition, we will have a new song for it. But until next time, thank you all for joining us today. We'll see you again soon.
to me, the room was tense. Lines were drawn in self-defense. They don't listen, they don't care. We're the ones who always share. I said, I know that kind of fight, where every word just fuels the night. But maybe there's a view we've missed, a truth that sits between the fists. We all want change, we all want pride, but something breaks when hearts divide. What if you dropped the guard this time and found a way to realign? We're on the same side, don't let our egos collide. It's no time to run and hide. Imagine the type of service we could provide if we see through each other's eyes. Leave the blame and just unite. We're on the same side, yeah, we're on the same side. They've got goals and we've got ours, different lanes but the same long hours. We all answer to the call to make it better for them all. No one wins when trust runs thin. The real success is shared within. The greater good's a wider view, and it's got room for me and you. So take a breath, let go of pride. Let purpose be the thing that guides. No us and them, no need to shout. We'll sort it in, not battle out. We're all the same side, don't let our egos collide. It's no time for run and hide. Imagine the type of service we could provide if we see through each other's eyes. Leave the blame and just unite. We're on the same side, yeah, we're on the same side. It's not about who gets the praise or who's been waiting for better days. It's what we build when we align, that stands the test, that heals the line. We're on the same